Hey, Richard Bey here with another installment of Richard Bey Talk with the man who's partially responsible for all of this, Albert Reinoso, my producer. We also worked together on radio in the past, and he hectored me for probably about 2 years, saying, "You've got to do a podcast. You've got to do a podcast." So now we are together at last doing a podcast. And thank you. The masses watching this, thank you as well.
I didn't exactly say it like that. What I did say was kind of to appease you, because you said, "What am I going to do with all my time?" And I said, "You should be doing a podcast. This is what people want to hear."
Okay, thank you for that. All right. Well, I'm going to show you this to begin with. This is it's upside down. This is a medal that I received many years ago for oratory. And it's responsible and a reminder of something that I really regret and that has affected my actions for the last 50 years. If you want to know more about that, stay tuned till the end of this podcast, because I'll tell you about it. But we are going to talk about oratory today. Of course, we're going to talk about Joe Biden's oratory, that speech he made in Poland, which was stirring, passionate, inspiring, has caused a big controversy because of the cri de coeur that he had at the end. A cri de coeur is a French statement. It means an impassioned cry from the heart. And this is what he said.
Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, for free people refused to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principles, hope and light, of decency and dignity, of freedom and possibilities. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. God bless you all, and may God defend our freedom, and may God protect our truth.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. Okay. Biden's called him a butcher, a war criminal, a murderer. In fact, as I held up this book a few weeks ago, they spoke in April, soon after his inauguration, and Putin was all ticked off that Biden had called him a murderer and said, and Biden said, "Oh, I do think you're a murderer." Didn't back down. And later on, Biden told Putin, "Mr. Prime Minister, I'm looking into your eyes, and I don't think you have a soul." Putin smiled and told Biden through an interpreter, "We understand each other." Okay, so, what did you expect him to say? Viva Vladimir at the end, after calling him all of that? And at his State of the Union address, he made a reference to this very same thing at that time. Nobody seemed to really notice. Here's the end of his State of the Union address.
It is our moment to meet and overcome the challenges of our time, and we will, as one people, one America, the United States of America. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you. Go get him.
Go get him. Who do you think he was referring to? Better get Saul? Better call Mako? He said, "Go get him." What does that mean? Get him. He was referring to Putin, of course, back then. Now, I saw Liz Cheney on Meet the Press, and Tim Russert was asking her, what she would do differently from Biden. And everything she talked about had to do with rhetoric. I want him to talk tougher. I want him to stand up. I don't want him to, to tip our hand. I want him to make Putin, more nervous. And Tim Russert said, "Well, yeah, so you're really talking about his rhetoric, but what actions would you take differently?" And Liz Cheney then started to talk about Iran. She wouldn't be part of the Iran deal because basically he's walking a narrow road between leading us towards a more expansive war and acquiescing to Putin's war of choice, his illegal war of choice and war crimes. But some people would like to make that narrow road a bike lane. He's caught. He says, for God's sakes, this man cannot remain in power and people complain. Lindsey Graham said one of Putin's advisors should get a gun and shoot him.
But what's wrong with what he said? I mean, I don't know anybody that doesn't agree with that. He cannot remain in power. It doesn't say that he wants to get rid of him.
How does this thing end with Putin in power? How does it end? I mean,
very bad for us, I would say.
Right. But if there have been coups in Russia in the past. I remember as a little kid when the Russian Politburo overthrew Khrushchev. I was amazed that they could get Khrushchev out. When Yeltsin took power, the military had a coup. I mean, of course, we'd like Putin not to remain in power in Russia. It doesn't mean that our policy is to get rid of him. But remember, this is a guy that has a paid-for-hire hit squad sent to Kyiv to assassinate Zelensky. Oh, that's okay, but we can't say get rid of Putin. So one thing I think that I would like to say is, praise God we don't have Trump as president during all of this. Trump has come up with 2 proposals so far on dealing with Putin and what's going on in Ukraine. His first was that we should paint jet fighters to look like Chinese planes, communist Chinese planes, and put markings on them so it looks like they come from China, and then have them bomb Russia, and Russia will think it's China, and they will destroy each other. Now, even if you think, he wasn't entirely serious, this is a serious issue. And with Trump, who knows if he was serious or not? Now, this week he came up with a different proposal. He said, Putin's always using the N-word. Every word out of his mouth is the N-word, the N-word. He thinks he's threatening us with the N-word. Now, he doesn't mean the N-word that most of us think of when we hear that expression. He meant nuclear. So Trump said, what I would do is I would send nuclear submarines armed with nuclear missiles and have them patrol up and down the coast of Russia and tell him, if I heard the word nuclear out of your mouth one more time, we're going to irradiate you, bomb you to smithereens. I mean, boy, that would be a great solution to all this, wouldn't it?
Well, I have to believe that the subs are already there, right?
Well, I don't think they're patrolling up and down the coasts. They are
close as they can get, I would think.
I don't know. I don't know if they are. And if you start to tell Putin, we're going to bomb you, we're going to bomb you, this is going to go back and you want to talk about escalation? That's an escalation.
Okay.
All right. Now, there are people who say, how can you negotiate with a war criminal? We didn't negotiate with Sloby Milosevic. He was a war criminal. We didn't negotiate with him. But I would point out that in the last month or so of World War II, Heinrich Himmler, who was the head of the SS and had run the concentration camps, had a Swedish doctor who came to him and said, look, the war is going badly. It was about a month away from defeat. He goes, maybe you should have some outreach to the Jews. And Himmler said yes. And someone from the World Jewish Congress flew into Tempelhof Airport, met with Heinrich Himmler with a large banner in this banquet room, the Nazi swastika across it, and negotiated with Himmler. And he saved 6,000 Jews who were in a Polish concentration camp and marked for extermination. Now, I always think, if that Jewish representative was willing to do that, we should be willing to sit down with almost anybody. Of course, in that conversation, you know what Himmler said? Well, I really never had anything against the Jews. It was all political. Yeah. Okay. Neither by talent nor political history is Joe Biden a great orator. He's got a hoarse voice, a downward inflection. He's got a kind of generalized delivery. There's no color to the words when he speaks them. Now, he did have a forceful speech in Poland, but it was pretty much this and this and this and this. He is not an eloquent orator. He's also got that stutter that we've heard about during the debates. Churchill said about oratory, of all the talents, of all the talents bestowed upon men, none is so precious as the gift of oratory. He who enjoys it wields a power more durable than that of a king. He is an independent force in the world. And of course, Churchill is probably esteemed as the greatest orator of the 20th century in so many of his phrases. We will fight them on the beaches. This is their finest hour. There are scores of elements of his speeches that we still reference. In fact, Zelensky took the framework of the Churchill speech. We will fight them on the beaches. And he created his own speech about Ukraine from that. And Zelensky, too, is an orator. He's an actor. That's what actors are trained to do. They're trained to take words, to color them, to give them passion, to make them moving, to make them come from some kind of a character as well, but also to be eloquent. And Zelensky was an actor. Ronald Reagan was an actor. And we remember his speeches. But remember, most political speeches are not written by the person who delivers them, the political leader. Churchill wrote his own speeches. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. That was written by a guy named Peter Robinson, who at one time had walked through Berlin, saw the wall, thought it was an atrocity, and said, hey, this would be great to put in a Reagan speech. And the other speech, incredibly moving, about the Challenger astronauts. They have left the bounds of Earth and touched the face of God. That was written by Peggy Noonan, who remains to this day a columnist at the Wall Street Journal. Even John F. Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. Ted Sorensen wrote Kennedy's speeches. Now, Kennedy was a terrific orator. He had also a spontaneous sense of humor that was evident in his news conferences. But he didn't write the speeches. For years, Sorensen was asked, who wrote that line? Ask not what you can do for your country. And Sorensen would smile and say, ask not. Which was a great answer. Now, Truman. Truman was not a great orator. He was full of piss and vinegar. But my father, I remember as a child, told me the story that after 12 years of FDR, who was a great orator, my friends, and you are my friends, he said, when after Roosevelt died, we turned on the radio and we heard this guy talking like this. My name is President Truman, and I am the new occupant of the White House, and we will go for. My father said, all of us were thinking, oh, what the hell have we gotten ourselves into? Of course, Truman went on to become, in my opinion at least, one of the greatest presidents of the 20th century, facing some of the most important issues of that time.
Of any time.
Of any time.
Yeah. But he was a great tailor, I heard. I heard he was a pretty good tailor.
He wasn't a tailor. He was
a
haberdasher. Yes. That's different. He was like Cy Sims.
I like to think he knew a little bit about the inseam. That's all.
My name is Harry Truman, and an educated consumer is our best customer.
That's right.
Now, Lincoln, we think of Lincoln, the Gettysburg Address. It's probably the quintessential American speech. But Lincoln had a high-pitched, whiny voice. He was not a great orator, although he obviously was a great speechwriter. And when he delivered the Gettysburg Address, he was following a guy full of bombast and color and life and passion. And when they wrote about it, they said this other guy that came before him was really moving and an incredible speaker. And then they hardly mentioned Lincoln. The Gettysburg Address did not become a national treasure until it was printed and people read it and were so impressed by its eloquence. So William Jennings Bryan, he's another one. You may not know him. He ran for president 3 times. He was a Secretary of State, I believe under Woodrow Wilson. But he's also the guy, most of us probably remember him from Inherit the Wind, where a fictional version of William Jennings Bryan is there. You know, I just came across this he was a great orator and known for his oratory, and people would get up and cheer when he spoke. But at the Scopes trial, when he was arguing against evolution being taught in schools, listen to this and remind yourself how current this feels. William Jennings Bryan said he was defending the right of parents to choose what schools teach. And he said these elite intellectuals were trying to invalidate every moral standard that the Bible gives us. La plus ça change. Okay, now another president who was not a great orator is probably best known for coming on television with a sweater and telling people that there was a national malaise, that most of us were getting depressed. The country was in recession. The hostages were taken in Tehran, and there was an oil crisis. So he came on with a sweater and said, you're probably not going to be able to heat your home the way you want to this winter. So just get out a good woolen sweater. And that's what he did, like Mr. Rogers, and sat there and spoke to people. But it wasn't too well received. I had the opportunity to interview President Carter in 1986. And as we ponder how we would handle a negotiation, or be part of maybe, or even to observe a negotiation between Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, Jimmy Carter's a good guy to look at, because he took Anwar Sadat from Egypt and Menachem Begin, a very right-wing Israeli prime minister who at one time had been a nationalist terrorist, and he brought them together at Camp David and created a peace accord. Here's what I asked him about that.
When we talk about the Camp David Accords, we generally talk about 3 men. All 3 men are no longer in political office. Begin was frustrated, to some degree bitter by what happened in his country. He resigned his office, as well as for personal reasons. Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, assassinated by militant religious fanatics. And you did not win a second term in a democratic process in our country. What about the 2 personalities of those 2 men? You had to stand between them and somehow get them to sit at the same table. They are very different men, aren't they?
Oh, yes, very much so. As a matter of fact, I couldn't get them to sit at the same table. We were at Camp David.
You couldn't get them to sit at the same table?
No, we were at Camp David 13 days, and the last 10 days, they never saw each other. We kept them 100 yards apart at Camp David just so we could make some progress. So, and I would negotiate with one, and then he would go back to his cabin, and then I would go negotiate with the other one, and in the last few days of the Camp David negotiations, I spent most of my time with their immediate subordinates who represented them, but they didn't see each other until we were preparing to fly out of Camp David back to the White House.
But Mr. Carter,
yes,
when they had the press conference, Mr. Begin stood up and went up and hugged Anwar Sadat as if he was his cousin from across the river.
That's right. That's because they hadn't seen each other for 10 days. But there was a sense of euphoria and brotherly love when the Camp David Accords were concluded. But then a lot of people have forgotten that for 6 months after that, we made very little progress on the peace treaty. And it was not until March or April of 1979 that I was finally forced, in effect, to go to Cairo and Alexandria and then to Jerusalem to try to get a peace treaty signed. And then when they came over for the peace treaty signing, there was another brief period of commitment to peace.
Were they equally as politically stubborn or immovable?
Sadat had a few strategic requirements, but he was very flexible on the details, very generous, if it came down to the negotiation. Begin was a stickler for details, for words. He's a semanticist, and he prides himself on which word's going to be here and there. So I would reach agreement with Sadat in 15 or 20 minutes, and it would take me 3 or 4 days to get Begin to agree to the same thing, and he would want to modify it all. But it was, I think I have to point out that Begin had to exhibit a lot more political courage in the compromises he made at Camp David than did Sadat.
Even though Sadat paid for his life eventually.
Well, that was with a minority group of fanatics. But
in
you have to remember,
in a sense, though, it was a result of the Camp David Accords, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and his trip to Jerusalem. But Begin has never had the support of his own party for the commitments he made at Camp David. They have never given him a vote in the Knesset or the Parliament to support his Camp David agreement.
Well, we're talking about these two men. When we come back, I'd like to ask you about two other men I'm sure you have very strong opinions about. One of them is Ronald Reagan. The other is Ted Kennedy. Okay, we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Oh, there's a lot more to that interview. And people often ask me, do you ever get nervous before an interview? That was one of the times. To be able to sit on a couch on live television for an hour with a man who was the most popular person the most powerful person in the entire world. Not too popular, actually. It wasn't too popular with my dad. So because my dad and my mother, they both were Republicans. My father had only voted for 2 Democrats for president in his entire life. One was Harry Truman. The last one was John Kerry, because he was sickened by the Iraq War. But if you'll indulge me, one of the other great blessings I had was that my father and my mother often came down and saw my show. And on this particular show, my father stood up in the audience and asked the former president of the United States a very probing question. Here
People
it
are
is.
talking. We do have a question out here about foreign policy, right?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to ask you about, not to dwell on the Shah of Iran and what I feel was an abandonment of the Shah of Iran before the Khomeini had
What would you
arrived
want
there.
him to do? What would you have wanted
Well,
President Carter? Should he have sent in troops?
Well, what I refer to is another great Democratic president, Roosevelt, who when someone asked him about a South American dictator, he said, so-and-so is an SOB, but one good thing, he's our SOB. In other words, he supported the United States. And my personal feeling was that the Shah of Iran was a stabilizing factor in the Middle East. He had the strongest military backed by the United States.
So let me get your point clearly, though.
Yeah.
You think we should support despots and dictators around the world if they support us?
We should try to convert their despotism, but I don't think we should abandon them for something much worse, which is communism, which is encroaching now into South America. And I think that the Contras, who are trying to overthrow the Sandinistas, the Contras are our SOB, as you might say, our good SOB.
We should support them.
I think we should support them with everything we have.
Mr. Carter, do you want to answer this gentleman?
Well, let me say, first of all, we never abandoned the Shah. We gave the Shah every possible assistance, short of sending in troops that I could think of, or that any of my advisors could think of. And I agree with you that the result of the Khomeini revolution has been much worse for Iran than anything the Shah was ever accused of doing. I think had the Shah given his people more of a role to play in government, and had the Savak, his secret police, not been so abusive to his people, he might still be there. Of course, I think he would have passed away with cancer, which he had. But this is a very important issue that you've raised. And our human rights policy was not designed to overthrow people, but to encourage those who were our friends to modify their policies in some way so that they would not be so unpopular and so that they would not suffer from a successful revolution.
Ah, my dad. I miss him so much. He was quite a man. You know, in that clip, my dad was 9 years younger than I am right now. Okay, so at the beginning of this podcast, I promised you, I'm holding a medal up for those who are listening. It is a medal with a ribbon. I think we have 2 pictures of it up there. And this was awarded to me for oratory in high school. It's the James K. Hackett Award for Oratory. Now, you might say, oh my God, I was a senior in high school when they gave this to me, before the graduation. And I've kept it all this time, but it has a different meaning for me. When Martin Luther King was assassinated and there were riots across the country, the school was concerned that there might be disturbances inside of the high school. It was Far Rockaway High School in Queens. So they asked those that they thought were student leaders, those who were white and those who were black, to sit in a room and talk to each other. And then they asked all of us to come to the auditorium. We had a large auditorium, and make speeches about, what had happened and what our feelings were at that time. So I wrote a completely anodyne, what's the right word, saccharine speech about brotherhood and how we all must treat each other as equals, and the American ideal, and all men are created equal. And when they called my name, I was in the audience to come up and read this speech. I thought, oh, this is such bullshit. I should just get up there, take out the speech, crumple it up, and throw it on the ground and tell people what I really feel. And at that time, this is what I thought. In this school, almost all the white kids graduated, the white Jewish kids graduated and went on to college. So many of the Christian kids in this particular school and in this neighborhood who had been taking classes like home ec and auto repair and metal shop, they went on to trades. And the black students, the great majority of them, didn't graduate at all. There were some, but the majority of them didn't even make it to graduation. And I said, that's what I should talk about. Why is this so? Why does this happen? How can we fix this? How can we put up with this? And I walked up to that stage and I looked down at the crowd of people and I read my bullshit speech. So it's a regret. I don't have many regrets in my life, but that's a regret I do have. And during the course of my life, I go back to that and I say, that is a moment of shame. That is a moment that I wish I could do over again. So when I've had the opportunity to speak my mind, even if there were unfortunate consequences of speaking my mind, I still do. In one instance, we were doing a talk show about expanding the definition of female beauty. And I usually either wrote my own copy or I had, or I spoke extemporaneously. I wasn't any good at reading a teleprompter. I'm blind as a bat. And the copy, I had to read copy over pictures. And I thought the copy with these pictures of Black and Asian women was racist and condescending. And I said, I'm not going to read this. I said, let me change it. And the producer said, no, you can't change it. I said, I'm not going to read this. So she said, well, then go upstairs and see the general manager and see what he says about it. I went to the general manager and I said, look, I said, you could fire me, but you can't make me say this. And perhaps I was fortunate that the general manager at that time was a black man, and he understood my point, and we changed the copy. And I went down and I read it. Now, some of you happen to know that when I was on radio during the hysteria about WMD and nuclear bomb in Iraq and Saddam Hussein, and if you spoke against the war, you were a traitor, that I was on the air every day. I said, I can't tell you we won't find WMD because you can't prove that negative. But what I can tell you is that we won't find any WMD based upon this fallacious, insubstantial, outdated evidence that they're giving us. And I had people call and say, you can't say this on the radio. You're going to be fired. I even had a guy named Pallone, I think, who was a representative from New Jersey, who called up and said, I can't believe that you're allowed to say this on the air. My father called me and said, couldn't you be for the war a little bit? You're going to be fired. And I said, well, if that happens, then it happens. But that's not the kid you raised, although it was the kid he raised read that stupid Martin Luther King speech. So anyway, I don't
think you should beat yourself up about it anymore, because you've made good for it right now.
And then I did the Jennifer Flowers show. Oh, that's an old story. But we'll leave that one for the future. What are we doing here? 32.
Can I ask you one thing before you leave? I know I'm going to extend the time here, but you haven't even mentioned, as an actor, this war on comedy that happened last night.
All right, I know, but I'm not going to, not today. You know what I think? Okay. Here's some things. It's just fortunate that Will Smith did not get to see Don Rickles perform, because he would have, he would have got up and beat the crap out of him. Here's some other things. That's a good
comment.
All right, but this is going to be up all week. Here's another one. What if Amy Schumer had made the remark and he went up and he slapped Amy Schumer? How would we be reacting today?
That's a good point, yes.
Number 3, can anyone just run up on the stage and start assaulting presenters at the Academy Award? Don't they have any security? Or is that a privilege just reserved for movie stars themselves? Okay, so
number 4, go to 4. You can get 4 out of this. Come on.
I can get 4 out of this.
Good points. I didn't mean to sidetrack you there, but I wanted to hear what you had to say, and I'm sure other people who are
number
listening.
4, I think that when Will Smith won the Academy Award, in my opinion, he should have been booed rather than given a standing ovation.
Okay.
His behavior was completely unacceptable, and Chris Rock, who I love, who I think Chris Rock is a genius. And I've seen him on Broadway perform as an actor, and he's a good actor too. And he was good on, what's that series that he did where he played the gang? Fargo.
Yeah.
He was good on that. I mean, he's a very talented guy. Will Smith is a talented guy too, but his behavior was completely unacceptable. So thanks for bringing us over. But because I wanted to finish with this. When I was I went to high school with you, right? Let's go back to elementary school. Miss Abramowitz, who had, what a figure. 5th grade. Bosomy Miss Abramowitz. Every boy in the class had a crush on her. She took us to see The Pirates of Penzance on Broadway. That was probably the first time I went to a theater. And then when we came back, we put on a production of The Pirates of Penzance for the school. I was the Pirate King. Barry Fumberstein was the modern Major General. But I liked that part better because it had the patter song. I am the very model of a modern Major General. I have information, vegetable, animal, and mineral. I know the kings of England, and I quote the facts historical, from Marathon to Waterloo and order categorical. All right, there's a lot more to that, but let's get on to this, because on Facebook, I found a guy named Serge who has updated that song. And let me just hope I don't stumble through it. I am the very model of a modern Russian general. My standing in the battlefield is growing quite untenable. My forces, though equipped and given orders unequivocal, did not expect this fight to be remotely so reciprocal. I can't recover tanks, but Ukraine farmers with a tractor can. It's all becoming reminiscent of our battles in Afghanistan. Now 7 generals killed. My time here starts to seem ephemeral. I am the very model of a modern Russian general. He is the very model of a modern Russian general. Okay.
Bravo, bravo.
I wanted to get that in. And
Bravo.
one thing, Albert, when I see you, I've got this for you.
I'm looking forward to it.
I bought an extra. Let me see. It's hard to see this backwards. There it is. Free Ukraine. And for the rest of you,
I'm going to wear it proudly, and you know, because of you, I have Budmo Ukraine on the back of my car. You've seen the picture in big letters,
I know.
People don't know what the hell to make of it.
I don't know. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you subscribe. I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned a few things that were, beyond your knowledge. And I hope you will tell your friends about it and share it with everybody. Remember, it's also an audio podcast as well as a video podcast. So from here, look at this. This is the Constitution mug I have. We the people. Let's have a coffee toast. Budmo. It means let us be. Can you believe that? Budmo is the Ukrainian toast. All right. Hope to see you next week and have a great week. All my best.